Welcome to this episode of Elliot and Michael Figure Out Substack Live in real time. Uh, so,
Hello, Ellen. Yay.
yeah, all right.
All right.
So Ellen gonna hopefully join us here on camera. We'll see if that works out. But in the meantime, I know that we have just a half hour here, so excited to have this conversation. And thank you, Michael, for taking the time. And I hope Ellen can join us as well. I thought first, for those who don't know, Michael, do you want to introduce yourself and give a little background on why you and I are talking about Rob Reiner in early childhood?
Sure. Hey, everybody. Hi, Elliot. I'm Michael Levine. My background is in child development research, public policy, and philanthropy. The story that I'm telling comes from really starts about 30 years ago when, Rob Reiner was in touch with me after the release of a major report when I was in philanthropy at Carnegie. But later on, I got involved in a range of, global education initiatives, including a lot of work in early childhood. I'm a LAPS media executive. I founded and ran the Joan Gans-Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop. Was on the senior team at Sesame for a while. And those of you who are on the Substack Live now know that I also helped run Noggin for a period of time. But Rob was a very, very special influence in my life. And, I ran his, foundation after leaving Carnegie, something called the I Am Your Child Foundation. So that's why I'm here. And I think Ellen Galinsky is coming on board too. She was my partner in crime then
Yes.
and now. One of the most important, folks in terms of her thought leadership, research and, program innovation over the years as well.
Yes, I'm hoping we can land the tech on Ellen joining us. If not, then I can always find a separate time to talk to Ellen to share her stories as well. Uh, so, Michael, I think first, can you take us back? Like, when did you first meet Rob? Like, what are your
Yeah.
tell us some stories.
So in April 1994, Carnegie Corporation of New York released an important report called Starting Points, Meeting the Needs of Young Children. It was, uh, quite a good response to that report, which was the first time that the emerging brain science about the importance of the first 3 years of life, 3 to 5 years of life, became, I would say, sort of put out in crisp, clear language in that report. It was front page news in the New York Times and was something that we had been working on with the Clinton administration. So President Clinton and First Lady Hillary Clinton were aware of the report and they shared it with the cabinet. So it became a sort of a major thing. There were a number of things that were bubbling at that time during the first Clinton administration, including the development of early Head Start, which Senator Kennedy was advancing at that time, and uh, what was then called sort of after the failed healthcare reforms of the first year or two of the Clinton administration, they decided to focus on a down payment on healthcare reform, which was the S-chip program, family leave, a number of other things were outlined in the report as things that Carnegie and the task force that led it, including Dick Riley, who became the Secretary of Education, were advancing as policy stuff. So this was sort of translational research, a synthesis of all the research about the importance of the first few years of life, put into what I would call sort of a policy blueprint. And Rob got wind of, so that's a little bit of longish
Yep.
background, but Rob got wind of the report. I don't know exactly how, but I got a call, and I wish I had my phone logs. I got a call towards the end of 94, maybe the beginning of 95, from a woman by the name of Bonnie Reist, who was later a commissioner in the state of California, but was, an aide to Rob, saying that he had, heard about the report, wanted to know more about the report. So I got on the phone with Rob. I don't know exactly when in 95, but Ellen Galinsky and I at that time were also working on ways to disseminate the Starting Points report through a public engagement campaign that we thought was important based on the response from some of the critical cabinet leaders, but governors and others. And I took a call from Rob, and anyway, long story short, me and Ellen and a couple of other early childhood experts and advocates were invited by Rob, along with a representative from Vice President Gore's office to do a briefing in Hollywood at Rob's home, at the same home, unfortunately, that he was taken last month. So it's very poignant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and obviously, condolences to you and everyone who knew him. I mean, I didn't get the honor getting to meet him, but I've been an admirer for a very long time. Hey, we successfully got Ellen
Oh,
on. Excellent.
so Ellen and I and Barry Zuckerman, who's a well-known preventive health, early childhood health expert who was at Boston City Hospital at that point, trekked out in was it between Christmas and New Year's? I can't remember, actually, Ellen.
It was
But
the 5th of December.
it was the 5th of December. Okay. So early December, she's got it. Yes. To give a briefing. And Rob gathered in his theater. Michelle, singer Reiner, his partner in crime and his long-term spouse, as well as, people that folks would recognize, Warren Beatty and Steven Spielberg and Annette Bening, and there was a baby or two, and other folks like the head of Disney. And me and Ellen had already been working on a number of different things that I described earlier, including, engaging not only state and community leaders, but, members of the mass media. Ellen had relationships with Johnson and Johnson, as did I. I was a program officer at Carnegie at that point, and Ellen can describe what she was doing, but she was running the Families and Work Institute, and was somebody who I'd been working with for several years at that point after she left Bank Street. So at the briefing, Ellen, why don't you talk about the briefing? I've been speaking too long. I mean, we stood up. I mean, no PowerPoint, guys. I think Ellen, I know you were on, but I held this up, and then you should also talk about this. um, but so we made our pitch, and Ellen should talk about it, and then
Yeah.
I'll add.
Well, there was a lot of discussion about in what ways could Hollywood contribute to this, and mostly we listened. But we had a particular advantage, which is that we knew about this research. I had been an advisor to Michael and the Carnegie Task Force on meeting the needs of young children, and I had a potential grant to do from the AT&T Foundation to do PSAs, public service announcements, of $1 million. That was a little appealing, and Michael was and is so well connected to the funder world. And so we ended up leaving that meeting with a plan to work together, which was, I think, pretty scary to all of us because it was Hollywood, you know, and how would the messages that we knew were rooted in science get conveyed to the general public? I know my board at the time at Families and Work Institute had a lot of trepidation about it, but I felt it would be a real chance to make a huge difference. And so we soldiered on.
Yeah. So the discussion it was wide ranging, I would say. I think, Elliot, you and I have talked about this a little bit. Rob had met some folks. He had been to Hope Street in LA, which was, family service, full service, comprehensive services center for, families with young children. He had spoken to some experts, including Bruce Perry, who's a bit of a controversial neuroscientist who was a little bit on the edge of, if you don't do something, during the first 3 years of life, you're talking about, everybody becoming a Romanian, orphan.
Uh-huh.
So there was some of that trepidation that Ellen just described was evident when we went out, and one of the reasons why I brought Ellen and Barry were not just because they were very solid scientists, but because they were really good communicators and translators for the science. And I thought that Rob would really enjoy that. So he had spoken to folks from Hawaii about a program called Healthy Start, which became a model which is active, to this day as part of Early Head Start. Through various iterations through the Commonwealth Fund and other things. But, maybe we should just do a program, right, at scale. I mean, Rob was very thoughtful about these sorts of things. He was very politically savvy. And so, he was pitching that a little bit. And I don't remember the exact moment that kind of cleared the room in a way, Ellen. Warren Beatty, who's sitting there with, um, uh, all these other folks, and I don't know which baby was there, but Annette Bening's baby was there. Um, Spielberg and Benning, right? And he says, "I am sick and tired of hearing all this bullshit," or something like this. Uh, yeah, yeah, yeah. What we do best is we should sell the shit out of the importance of the first few years of life. We should, and that became the thing. Like
That's what we did.
we should have a national campaign. Not that me and Ellen weren't thinking about something like this, but it was very persuasive to the community right there. And Rob was like, "Okay, that's what I'm going to do." And I'm going to call up John Cook at Disney, who was already there, and I'm going to call up. I don't know what his relationship at Castle Rock at that moment was to ABC, but he knew the president of the network, and I'm going to get Tom Hanks, and then Ellen and I, but Ellen especially, connected to friends at Newsweek, and we had a lunch with Rob and the number two at Newsweek, and then a golf game, ensued in which Rob got this idea from me and Ellen that we should do a special edition Newsweek, and in the meeting it was clear that that would take some money. So $5 million later, special edition of Newsweek was, put on the block. So, and Rob raised the money for the ABC primetime special.
Yeah, I think what we did, I mean, what Rob mostly did was the a television special. And what Michael and I and a group of other people did was I called it a war room, but we basically made a map of if we're going to change the public perception in this country of the importance of the early years, because at that point, and studies showed that most people thought that kids didn't really start learning till they talked or till they went to school. So no one understood the importance of the early years. So we made this war room where we said we need this group involved, this group involved, this group involved, that group involved. We need a national effort, we need a local effort, we need a state effort. So we had all of the constituencies mapped out like a war room, and we got someone in every single state to join a coalition. We had regular conference calls to brief them. We raised money, and this is where Michael and philanthropy was critical, but we raised money to give money to the major national organizations so it wouldn't feel competitive. It would feel like this was this was in the water, in the air. All of these people were suddenly discovering this. Um, we um, we we had two roles, Michael and I. One was to build this national coalition and this initiative. I was pretty separate from the television show. Michael probably a little less. But the filmmakers that I had worked with for years, New Screen Concepts, were doing it. So in that way, we weren't separate.
No,
Um,
they took over anyway.
yeah, yeah,
It is like
and
another time we'll talk about
yeah,
it.
and our job was to ensure the scientific accuracy and to build a constituency. And so we had different national organizations doing different parts of it. And in the beginning, it was just about mothers at home. We argued for the reality being that kids were in childcare in the first 3 years, and so this should include the early childhood field, all the people who intersect pediatricians, all the people we worked with, the Academy of Pediatrics. We really had this war room where we initiated. I want to go to the White House conference because
Yeah. But before you do that, just
okay,
because I think it's important for folks who are thinking about mobilization strategies. It was a war room, but it was based on, Ellen, you'll remember this. Like one of our advisors was Julie Richmond, the former Surgeon General, who was, after he left government, he was a professor at the School of Public Health at Harvard. And he had a theory of change, which was very compelling. I think I've talked to you about it, Elliot, which was you need three things to mobilize significant change in America or any, democratic society. You need to demonstrate the knowledge base, right? You have to, come to a place where, and this is what he did with cigarettes, and, the Surgeon General's warning on, You had to synthesize the knowledge base. You had to translate it to best or emerging best practices, and then you had to have a mobilization strategy attached to it, right? And the mobilization strategy is what Ellen is describing, but without having at least, and the breakthrough here was we did talk about, and probably what people don't know is that it's about 3 paragraphs in the starting points report, the stuff. But we made a decision consciously, and it was a big argument at Carnegie, and I think that Ellen was part of it. Like, I remember a conversation with my boss, Vivian Stewart. This brain stuff is a little iffy. Are we overstating it?
It
Mhm.
was iffy.
Right? Are we overstating it? And we decided, I said, no, it's merging and it's new and fresh and it will get attention and it's important that it does so. So we made a decision to push it. It mostly worked.
Mhm.
But I think that having the knowledge base, the practice base, and a lot of the report and a lot of what Rethinking the Brain does is it talks about how to translate these things into caring and responsive caregiving. So anyway, having that was
Can I-
super important.
Yeah, I
And
just want to add 2 things there. One of the things we did that was hugely significant was we brought together at Carnegie the
yeah,
people who had led major public engagement and change campaigns. So not just smoking, but the environment, seat belts, uh, helmets for riding
yeah,
bikes.
drunk driving. Yeah,
Yeah, drunk driving. And we brought them all together in a room. And interestingly enough, they had never talked to each other.
Huh.
They had each led successful.
convening power. Very
Yeah,
Convening them.
that was hugely important. And we said, you've all done something that resulted in significant change. What worked and what didn't work. And we used that plus Julie Richmond's notion as a map. We had a theory of action, a theory of
Huh.
change, and that was the foundation for everything.
It was a campaign. It was a campaign organization.
It was a campaign. We were running a campaign. The second thing that we did that was also really important was when the public was so interested in all of the research on brain development, which was pretty, just beginning if we think about what we know now and what we knew
Yeah.
then, at that point.
30 years, pretty soon. Just
Yes,
a couple
30
months
years.
away.
We should have a big party because
Yeah.
it was the bestseller for Families and Work Institute for years. When I finally took it out of print, my own staff was gonna come shoot me. It was such a bestseller, but what we
It's
did was
also like beautiful. I mean, just
beautiful.
beautifully designed. Yeah.
We called Irving Harris, because he had been on the task force from the
Uh-huh.
now Harris Foundation.
Right.
Um, Michael and I called him sitting in his office and we said, everybody's interested in brain development, and we really don't know. I knew developmental research
And he was on the task force
quite
too.
well.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's also on the
he was
start.
on the task force.
Yeah.
And we said, we should bring together the leading neuroscientists with the leading developmental researchers to see if what they know is in common. And we did invite people like Bruce Perry, et cetera, there. But we then had Michael, we make this call and we're sitting there and Irving calls back and it's February. And it's my day off, actually. I'm going to meet my family and go do something. Presumably, they're waiting for me outside. This didn't
Look at the things that he
happen.
remembers. I love it.
Yeah, I remember this. And so Irving calls back in about 5 minutes, so quickly anyway. And he says, okay, I've got the University of Chicago in June. And this is February. I don't even know who the leading neuroscientists are.
Right.
I'm like, oh my God, we have to pull off a conference, in 3 months. But that conference became the most, I mean, I've never had people offer me their firstborn children, whatever. People wanted to come so badly. It was really, and it became a cover story of Time and News
Yeah.
before the special edition.
It was incredibly valuable in also preparing for the White House conference, which
Right.
already in planning. I mean,
Yeah.
the other thing that I want to say before we go on, Elliot, sorry to kind of take over. One of the people who is not well known in the early childhood field, but who is just absolutely central to all this was my boss, David Hamburg. David was the president of Carnegie Corporation, worked after Carnegie for another 20 years. He's an expert on international conflict resolution, but also on bonding among primates. He was just so active in making sure that the political cover and the scientific cover
Mm.
were there. And, you know, this issue of credibility for Rob, like he gave a lot of credit. Like his son was actually, his daughter, Peggy, became the head of the FDA as well as the head of the New York City Department of Ed. But his son was a filmmaker, film writer. So David was sort of open to this, which you wouldn't have expected as a former head of the Institute of Medicine, you
Yeah.
know, a professor at Harvard. So David really opened up, and also being supportive of the kind of work that, you know, Ellen and a lot of the other early childhood grantees were doing when I was at Carnegie. So David, you know, passed a few years ago, but a remarkable human being.
Oh, I appreciate you saying it. And honestly, no, I mean, I want to create a platform for you all to tell these stories because they're not as well known anymore. And like, I learn a lot every time I hear them. And I think for the newer generation
Well,
of folks working here, it's really important.
people relate the interest in the early years often to this founding of the Harvard Center on the Developing Child, which is critically important in the history. But I think what we did in the 90s up until Neurons to Neighborhoods, which wasn't until 2000, was we built the platform for this. And there were surveys. We did pre and post surveys. We really did change the public understanding of the early years. It was
No, and
by the metrics that we set, we were successful.
Neurons Neighborhoods was a response to some of the overstatement of the brain science by folks like Rob and Bruce, which we were always arguing was about. It's not over. It's not over. I mean, brain development, and we've learned in the 3 decades since that, I mean, the brain is, you know, resilient, and there's lots of,
Yeah.
don't ever give up. Um, but it was also just the infrastructure that some of the foundations, including Carnegie, had built. Like we had created the Forum on Children and Families at the National Academy of Sciences, and then the Board on Children that Deborah Phillips led prior to. So this institution building that was done made it possible so that when Jack and Deborah Phillips said that's not quite right to some of the ways in which the brain science, and you saw this proliferation of brain toys and
Yes.
Einstein in vitro and all these things that me and Ellen were worried about. I mean,
We fought against that so
you know, we
hard.
probably didn't know that exactly all that was going to happen, but the commercialization of the brain science became a big thing
Hmm.
in the 5 to 10 years after the Starting Points report. It wasn't the only influence, obviously, but so these were all things that you could if you really were doing forensics, yeah, Starting Points was critical.
Yeah. And
Points
I
was
know.
critical. And we worked very, very hard to try to make everything. That's what we were rethinking the brain was. We worked very hard to make sure that it was founded on the best science. Now,
Yeah,
you can't stop people from saying what they're going to say when a microphone is in front of them.
Sure.
yeah.
So Michael and I would do deep breathing when that happened, but we tried really, really hard, and everything that was printed or created.
I would say
was-
net positive, like folks like Matthew Melmid, who was, you know, head of 0 to 3 then and head of 0 to 3, you know, now, like we also, you know, put him on the board. Like, you know, we tried our hardest, as Ellen suggested, to, you know, surround, you know, Rob with, you know, serious, you know, researchers and, you know, folks who cared about,
and Dan Siegel he turned to Dan Siegel.
Siegel and Helen Blank. And I mean, you know, there were other folks who, you know, had things to say that were more controversial, but, um, yeah. Yeah,
I'm conscious of so we have 5 minutes left. And Ellen, I know you want to talk about the White House conference. So let me give you the floor to talk about how that played into all this. Because again, I think that's another episode that is not well known anymore.
Well, you have to understand that this was a very clearly orchestrated plan. So we had state action, we had local action, we had, and then we had a White House conference. So we gave people in the field a series of milestones, from the Newsweek special edition to the television show that Rob did to the White House conference. But the White House conference brought together leading brain researchers, and we helped organize it. In fact, I sat at a desk in the White House for months. You know,
Nicole Ravner.
yeah, oh, well, raised the money for a film projector at one point.
Wow.
No,
Um,
and David was very active in talking to him
Yeah.
directly about it. Like this wasn't something that Bill Clinton's staff, you know, organized, although he came to the conference and, you know,
Mhm.
did some really, you know, important stuff. But I mean,
we organized it.
to be honest, they weren't sure whether they should invite Rob. I mean, just to be honest.
Yeah.
But, you know, David and Ellen and I, you know, vouched for Rob that, you know, he should come and be an important part of it and so on.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's where the Joan Lombardi, right, was also another thing in that. Yeah, it's a lot of the different people that we are still the
Yeah,
Titans.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
The army of the persistent, as Ralph Smith calls us.
Ellen, what
yes,
was the timing of the Newsweek special edition? It was exactly around the White House
It
conference.
was around the White House
Yeah,
conference. And we had, other than we were there at the beginning and suggested it after we had done the June conference in '96, the White House conference was exactly a year later, and we released Rethinking the Brain at the White House conference.
mm,
and I think First Years Last Forever. At least some part of that was already ready.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. There were we did do PSAs. We did. I mean, it was an old-fashioned
Yeah,
campaign on every level.
mention Newscreen and Greer Margolis before we go, because those are
Well,
really
yes, we work with Drew Margolis, Mitchell Burns, GMB, Jim Margolis particularly, and so that messages were very carefully framed and tested. And they also did pre-post testing, and we set up a group of, how will we know if we're successful if
yeah,
more governors talk about early childhood, if there's more money on the state level given to early childhood, if we had a series of if we did I 0 to 3 did a poll measuring whether or not attitudes had changed, and they had. So we had a series of criteria, but we had a partnership at the highest level that included help with how to frame these messages in a way that they would be heard, because we really wanted people to understand the importance of the early years. We were terrified that it would be misconstrued and hyped. I mean,
yeah.
that was my terror all along, every single day. But
it's
b- uh, which is why I went on to do adolescence. But
yeah, yeah. Just in the last
but
few
I
days.
feel like it was a really very successful
Yeah.
uh, partnership of a lot of very unlikely players, and that was one of the lessons from the convening that we had, which is you need unlikely fellows, you need unexpected messengers, and Rob certainly was.
Yeah, just to finish, and I can stay longer if people want to continue the conversation. Let's talk about Rob, because
Yeah.
this become more about what we did.
Yeah.
He was just centrally important. Not to diminish, our role in any way, shape, or form, but he and his colleague Chad Griffin really were the main architects of Prop 10. They took the starting points blueprint.
Say what Prop 10 is for people who aren't from
Yeah,
California.
so this is what's now known as First Five California. It was a proposition. There are direct ballot measures in California and several other states, and Rob and his aide Chad Griffin, who is very well known for his marriage equality work as well, decided that they would put a proposition on the ballot in 1997, 96, 97, and they would use actually tobacco as the bad guy, and that they would, use a tax, a 50 cent a pack tax on tobacco to generate $700 million in early childhood services, and they created an infrastructure which was modeled after Smart Start in North Carolina, of these local alliances that would be, county run, and it's we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of that proposition, and billions of dollars directed towards early childhood. So they fought big tobacco with great energy and faith and courage. And then Rob went on to spend 5 or 6 years chairing the Early Childhood Commission, the Prop 10 Commission. And a really smart thing that he did, which I'm not sure that I thought was a great idea at the moment, was he carved out a set aside, which was for parent, education, that would be part of, and that's where all these videos and like millions of videos around, from Your Healthy Baby, Safe from the Start, First Years Last Forever. I remember when I was running the foundation, we literally sold them for $1 because me and Rob said that we didn't want to make any money off of them. Maybe we raised them to $2 at some point. We sold several million copies of these things.
Wow.
And he got every single person from Gloria Stefan to Tom Hanks to Billy Crystal to, the Will Smith and Jada. He got everyone who was a talented person to buy into this thing. He really converted so many folks in his network to be early childhood advocates, not like him, but to just give their time so generously and so selflessly. So um, hats off and he went on to, spearhead the marriage equality work and many other things that are just so important in terms of, especially today, the kinds of progress that we made on some of these different, issues. He will, he will be so severely, missed.
Michael, say what Rob was like.
He's funny as hell. I mean, he, he would sit with you like I went to Chadbourne. Too many. I'm trying to like sort of not remember all the times that I went, but we usually, meet in his office at Castle Rock and like to go to lunch. And there would usually be, folks hanging around in the Castle Rock mess, like Terry McAuliffe, who, became the governor of Virginia, and lots of other, what was the word? How do you describe it, Ellen? That Hollywood people were like Washington, D.C. policymakers, only better looking. Um, so there was a lot of mix between sort of the Hollywood Washington crew and his orbit, which was kind of really interesting for me. I was in my 30s or 40s, early 40s. He was very quick and very urgent, and stuff just couldn't wait. Which like I'm from policy. I sort of like understood and appreciated that, but I was also with Ellen and others like trained to be a little bit more reflective about things. So I would say his instincts were excellent. He was a real liberal, definitely a progressive, definitely to the left of me, probably, in terms of how he thought about the world. And there was a little bit of a meathead, element there from time to time. But, an authentically, good human.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. Ellen, any last thoughts here before we close
Well,
out?
he was one of the most passionate people whom I have ever met. He was so committed, uh, intensely emotional about how important this was. If I remember one
Based on his own therapy.
yes, based on it was based on having
very, very poignant right now, I have to say.
yeah, I know, because he felt the way that he was messed up in life had to do with his earliest years, and he didn't want that to happen to other people. I remember when we convinced him that this campaign needed to involve the early childhood field, not just women and not just mothers, but fathers and grandparents and childcare workers. And then we were doing a briefing for him on the childcare field, and he found out how underpaid and undervalued was. He had a good old fashioned temper tantrum.
Yeah.
He was like, he was gonna
Could not believe it.
could not believe it and wanted to rewrite the story. I mean, he's going to
Wow.
rewrite that story. Uh, he had an unusual and really quite brilliant take on what happened. So my favorite thing was going to lunch with him because his take on the news of the week or whatever was not not what you would hear,
Hmm.
pontificating about.
Right.
Oh,
He called me after 9/11, and we had a very interesting conversation, which I won't share here. But he had definitely a different take. I would
yeah,
say a very sophisticated, different take.
brilliant. It was brilliant. I mean, he was brilliant. It was
I
just
think he wanted to be governor, to be honest.
he did want to be governor and eventually chose not to. When Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor, it was like I could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well,
Thanks for giving
yeah, no,
me
I
and
just
Ellen
wish
a
we could
chance
talk
to.
longer. In the interest of like this being early childhood being critically important, I've got to go hop on some calls about what's going on right now, the federal government. But I really do appreciate you sharing these stories, honoring his legacy. It is obviously a huge loss, and my condolences to you and everyone who knew him. But thank you so much for honoring him in this way and helping more people understand the indelible impact that he had on our field and on kids and families throughout America. So
Thank you,
just,
Elliot. Thank you
yeah,
for telling the story and also for digging into the history.
yeah,
Thank you for
absolutely.
writing about it, and thank you for doing this.
You're so welcome. All right, y'all. Have a good day.
See you, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye, Ellen.